it's so just interesting to me because there's pros and cons to all of it, and there is no right way to get your book out there, which is something that I've always said because uh, I know a bunch of indie authors who are more successful than some trad authors that I am friends with.
Dave Jennings, welcome to the show. Starting off, where are you originally from?
So I was born on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Mom and dad were both Air Force vets, and I think it's a rule that you have to give your firstborn to the Air Force. So that was basically what happened with me.
How many siblings do you
I've
have?
got one brother 2 years younger than me, and a sister who is 4 years younger.
Neither of them like joined the service or anything?
Just me,
No.
leading the way.
What your parents, what did they do when they were in?
Dad was let's see, I want to say mom was some sort of, they were both officers, and she was oh my gosh, I can't remember the word for it. She did a lot of like admin stuff, and she was the executive for commanders, right? Protocol officer, that's the word for it. She was a
Oh, okay.
protocol officer. And dad did, like he taught a lot. I know he was at AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology. He was a teacher there after he got his doctorate in at Purdue in change management. And eventually he left the service and started his own consulting company, which he's been doing now. He's 71 now, so he's still working, which is crazy. But
That's
yeah,
sick.
I think like
Yeah,
he
that's
just
sick.
really loves what he does. Like he could have retired 10 years ago, but he like doesn't want to. So meanwhile, I got the complete opposite gene, and I'm like, as soon as I can retire, I'm going to.
Let's say you were to retire tomorrow, like would you continue to write?
Yeah, and and it's funny
Yeah.
because I say like retire, but to me, retiring
Mhm.
is just writing full time, which I'm kind of doing. Well, I am doing it now. I'm technically writing full time because I left my job at the contract ended for the Department of Defense back in September. I had another novel on the way, and I was like, this is the get pushed from the nest and fly or die moment for me. So I was like, now is the time. I've got 3 books. I got my High Glade trilogy already out, and I've got a fourth one now that's in production, and I have ideas for more books. So I was like, you know what? I have enough money saved up right now that I can afford this, for the next year of my life or whatever, to really genuinely pursue being a writer full time. And to me, retirement is just another word for I am going to write books until I don't feel like I have anything else to say.
Doing whatever you actually want in your free
Bingo.
time and not free time, I guess.
Absolutely.
Do you feel like your dad, like him, how old were you when he started his
I
company?
was maybe like 12 or 13.
Okay, so that was like still a very like formative year. Do you feel like that influenced you to go off and like do your own thing?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's always funny because
Yeah.
he's telling me, he's like, you've got the entrepreneur gene. And it's funny because like I don't see myself as that, but I think other people might, and other people do. They look at me who's off, like, now I am doing my own thing. Like I'm technically my own boss, which is crazy. But I still don't see it as that. I'm like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I just write books and, tell people about them. So, it's just like it doesn't compute for me, but it absolutely, like, he and I both have this gene that kind of made us strike off on our own, and now I don't have anybody telling me what I can or can't do. So
It's nice. Yeah, dude. When I started like the podcast and the content stuff that I was telling you about earlier, I initially thought, because I had the same perception. I was like, oh man, if I'm an entrepreneur, like I gotta like build this like piece of tech or like this app or something so I can sell for like $100 million. I was like, that is the idea, or I gotta open a brick and mortar like pizza spot and then like open like 10 more. And then now and I've talked about this concept in previous episodes. I feel like the age of entrepreneurship is like now. Like tech is so good where you can have an idea. If you have a good idea and the market is like validating that, this, that, and the other, like I feel as if you can kind of go on your own venture a lot easier than you could 20
Mm.
years ago. Dad started his own business. You were 12 years old. You were still living in
Mhm.
Right Pat at the time, or did you kind of like move a
We
lot?
did move a lot, but I spent almost all of my pre-military life in Ohio. So I definitely, I was born and raised there, and I tell people I'm from Ohio, and obviously the military moves you around a lot too. So, I've just been all over the place, but for the majority of the time, yeah, we grew up. We spent most of my young life in Dayton, and then moved up to Cleveland after my dad left the military.
Is that why you and Waif, like Brandon, were so close at the time? Because you guys were both like
I
diehard
Yeah, I
Ohio.
think so. Yeah, it's just like we Ohio guys got to stick together. And I'm gonna see him. I'm doing a book tour. I got two dates. One, I'm going to Akron in April, I think, and then I'm going to I can never remember. I know, yeah, I can never remember which one it is that Ohio pronounces it. I think it's Medina, but in like June, and he's like, dude, I'm gonna go to both of those. I'm gonna show up. So, I'm like, all right, man, let's go.
That's sick. Dude, he is like such a ride or die
Oh,
friend. Like he's always
well, I love that guy. I love Brandon Waith.
yeah, that's funny. Okay, so you joined straight out of high school, or did you go
No,
to college
I
for a little bit?
did 2 years of college because I wanted to find out what it felt like to be in debt. So I did, I was on and off, but I joined the Air Force. I originally I wanted to do ROTC, but I actually ended up sleeping through the AFOQT. So I ended up enlisting instead. I was like, well, I sort of blew that shot, and I didn't want to wait another year to have to take that test. So, I was like, all
Yeah.
right, screw it. I'm really glad I did it because school to me was so I needed results, right? Like I never was the type to be able to see really like the big picture of school and like why it was important to get a degree. And I was like, I'm not seeing any immediate results from this. This is not worth my time. So I never took it seriously. But the Air Force for me was very, very different. It was like, okay, I can see the fruits of my labor at the end of the day, right? Like I know what I'm training for. I know what I'm studying for. And in the ultimate irony, the my first job in the Air Force was a Korean linguist, and they sent me to school for a year and a half. So the universe has a sense of humor.
It's so funny you say that because I left college, joined the Air Force. Sorry, I'm getting my
Mm.
laptop out. I left college, joined the Air Force, thinking the exact same thing. I was like, dude, I would much rather learn one thing and then do that for what sounds like only
Yeah.
20 years, and then I'm good. And then I'm done with it. And just like you said, like all my buddies went to DLI. I went to obviously like our Intel school, which is not as long as
Mhm.
yours, but is a year and a half itself. And then you have to like get evaluated every year because you're aircrew. And after like 5 years, I was like, bro, the heck,
This
dude? I was
sucks.
like, what am I signed up for? That's funny. Okay, where did you give us like a quick history of, because you were in what, 12 years, right?
13 and some change. I
13,
usually round
yeah,
up to
13
14
years.
because it's easier, but technically it was like 13 years and, like 6 months or something.
Yeah, I remember when I met you in Afghanistan, you were in E7, and I forgot who told me this, but someone was like, "Oh, dude, he made E7 in like 11 years or like something crazy." I was like, "Oh, holy shit, this dude's like
Fast
him,"
burner.
you know? I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, it was kind of nuts.
So how'd you get to
I
that point?
remember
Yeah.
it took me, it's funny because like, so another guy who's coming to see me in Akron is Carney Vertner, who retired as a chief,
Yep.
20 years. Homeboy made every single rank on the first try. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I was like, oh my God. Because I remember he was a senior airman when I met him. And I think I may have just put on tech. And the next time I met him, he outranked me. I
Whoa,
was like,
really?
I was convinced he was going to be Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And honestly, I think if he kept going, he would be eventually, because that dude had everything going for him, and he like loved the Air Force, and he was good at the Air Force. Like there's two different things. Those sometimes rarely come together, but they are two different things, believe it or not. Yeah, and I enlisted in 2004. Went to DLI for Korean. Graduated December '05. And then, I mean, it was so funny because I was a Korean linguist stationed at Offutt, and I did my very first deployment to Al Udeid, flying over Afghanistan as a Korean linguist, right? And I was like, something's not making sense here. So I was like, doing these 14-hour missions on the RC-135, and I was like, there has got to be a better way. And I heard about this thing that eventually became the 1 Alpha 8X2 career field airborne ISR. They called it like Torch. They refer to us as SI riders and TISOs, tactical systems operator. And I cross-trained into that when I was, let's see, I think it was 2010. And then I never looked back. I did that until I got out in 2018. I got out the same year Gift of the Shaper launched. So very calculated.
No way. So you did, so you left Offutt, you did Task Force Torch, you did a few deployments with Task Force Torch. How many deployments did you do before, we were in Afghanistan, 2019? No, that math wouldn't make sense. 2018?
Yeah, 2018. I think makes sense. Maybe 2017. I think probably 2017.
You know what? For some reason, I thought I met you on my second deployment. I definitely met you on my first, I believe. I think so, because when I saw your notes and you said you got out in 2018, I was like doing the math in my head, and I was like, that's impossible. And I was like, wait, did he extend? Because you didn't extend, right? February 2018 timeline.
I got out. I think my date of separation ended up being sometime in November, I want to say 2018, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay. But your last deployment was when?
My last deployment may have been that year, maybe 2018. But, I'd have to honestly like pull up my phone and look at my pictures. That's the best way for me to like sort these things out in my head. Because going to, basically like I'd been to the same 3 locations, right? Like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Djibouti, like so many times that I have literally lost count. I had to go back in my, what is it, like your UFPM or something like that, like, my personnel files, and be like, when did I do this? When did I deploy to this country? Like, because we were just doing those like 2 and 3 month deployments, and then you come home for that same amount of time, and then you go back and you do it all over again. I was like, oh my God. So I tell people that I wrote Gift of the Shaper on my 9th combat tour, and I think that number's accurate. And it's like, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Like the number's probably wrong. And I like somewhere in the neighborhood of, 13 combat deployments I did in total. But like, if I'm being perfectly honest, I really don't know. And I'd have to count them up.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. Cause I remember like when I first got to the unit, I mean, guys, I would just hear the stories when we were in training, actually, is a better example. I remember getting a text message from someone who was already at the unit. It was like a random text, and they were like, hey, are you Norman Driggers? And I was like, yes, who is this? Didn't even answer the question. And they're like, you guys need to start getting ready. Like they start sending us the RTM and like all this other stuff. And it was a guy from the 19th. But they were sending us all this stuff. And I was like, dude, I was in intel fundies. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And they're like, bro, by the time you get to the unit, you need to be ready to deploy. And I was like, oh, it's like that.
Hell yeah, man. I lived for that for a really long time. And for, there was a while, like I had my starter marriage in the military, lasted like a year. But for the most part, like I was single, and it was both a byproduct of and of my lifestyle, and like sort of by choice too. It was both, honestly. And I was like, well, I can't have relationships because I deploy all the time, and I want to keep deploying, so I can't have relationships, So it was very much whatever the opposite of a catch-22 is. I don't know, but it's somewhere in there.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean that deployment rate is just like,
Mhm.
That's hard. That, you know, I did 4 when we extended. It wasn't like the 60-day. I started doing like the 90 turned like
Yeah.
120 or like 110 day rotation and stuff like that. And so I did 4, and then I eventually went to the weapon school and
Mm.
taught there. The entire time, to your point, like the ops tempo was just so high that you're like, I can't like live a normal
Yep.
life. Like there is no normality in
Mhm.
this life. Yeah.
Yeah, and even after I separated, I did contracting for the DoD, and it was deployment based because there are so few people who are number one qualified for it, and number two who even want to do it. Which is why like they paid us a lot of money. They paid us a lot of money to do that stuff and to go to countries nobody wanted to go to and hang out and do things nobody else will do. So, it was, and again, like that was nice because I could work as an author too. Like I wrote two novels in the time that I was working as a contractor. And that was like 100% the reason that I did it and took the job, because I knew I was going to have number one, downtime, and number two, an opportunity to write like on days that I wasn't flying. So it was all orchestrated, and I'm happy that it actually worked out. But yeah, man, you'll go crazy. Like we did shorter deployments, thank God. We did 90 on, 90 off, which to me was just about perfect until we switched to 75s. And that is absolutely perfect because number one, 90 on, 90 off means you are gone the same time every year and you're home the same time every year. And
Hmm.
as a consequence, I missed Christmas and New Year's and summer for 4 years. And I just never was home for the holidays. And finally, when we switched to 75s, I had my first New Year's at home in like 5 years. And I was like, oh, this is such a relief. It's like being home and being around the people that you love is, it makes you remember why you do it in the first place.
100%. That's a really good point. In the 90 days, exactly to your point. There, that was some of the feedback. Like after you had left, that was some of the feedback. They tried, at least AFSOC tried to do like some cycle. We don't even have to get into all that, but they were like, yeah, let's try to see if we can figure this out. So, Jim Bob and his family isn't missing him
Yeah.
for Christmas every
Yep.
Christmas for the 6 years that he's,
It's tough,
deploying
man.
and stuff like that.
It's tough.
Yeah, it absolutely sucks. Yeah, so let's backtrack super quick here. So did a bunch of deployments, 13, maybe 14, maybe 20. We
Yeah.
we have no idea. The
Nobody
record
knows.
will never know. But 2018 came around February. Like when did you hit the button in like whatever that website is? Like when did you punch and you're like, it's time for me to get
Man,
out? Like what was going through
I
your
want to
mind
say it
too at the
was
time?
like, I think it was sometime around June, July, maybe August, because I remember doing taps and I had a bunch of leave that I needed to burn through. And I did it was like a 2-week vacation to Belize just with a bunch of good friends of mine. And I was like,
That sounds
it
fucking
was
sick.
awesome. It was so fun. And my dad loves to tell the story because it was originally like 10 of us, and guys and girls all going together. And eventually as the date got closer, for one reason or another, personal or professional obligations, the dudes were dropping out, and it eventually ended up being me and 7 women going to Belize. Like, I was like, I always had to caveat this whenever he brings it up. Whenever my dad brings it up, I was like, half of those women were gay, number one. And number two, like it wasn't like that, but everyone's always like, oh my God, that must have been the most fun you've ever had. It was, but for different reasons, because they're awesome people. So I still look back, like I still keep in touch with every single one of those women I went on the trip with, and I'm texting them the pictures and stuff like that. This was God, what, 7, 8 years ago now, and it's still like that may be the most fun I've ever had on vacation, just ever. I was partying like a late 20s woman.
That was all you needed, and you're like, I can't go back to the
Absolutely.
military
I
after
was like,
this.
I'm done. I'm done.
At that point, you had already started writing Gift of the Shaper, right? That was your first like published book.
Gift of the Shaper came out in February 2018. So I had started, and it's funny because like I always try and pinpoint when I started writing it. and I think it was I think I was in Kenya, and it was like 2012, maybe 2013. I'm gonna say probably 2013.
Oh, so this is like way
Yes,
further out.
definitely.
Okay.
Because I remember I had finished writing it sometime in 2016. And I was like trying to query agents and publishers. And I remember I was doing it. I was on a deployment to Niger in 2016. I remember specifically because my dates were June to December of 2016. And I know that because I signed my contract with my publisher on December of 2016, the very same week that I signed my divorce papers from my wife. So it was a good week for me. I was very happy. Both of those things ended up being very good things for me.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay, so yeah, you started writing, you started writing, then you published. What all goes into publishing? How much do you know about publishing nonfiction as well?
Nonfiction, not a lot, but I do know a lot about
Okay.
the publication process in general.
Can you give like a quick, like 30-second or however long you want to talk about it, about like what Gift of the Shaper is? That way we can just like get that context for the
Well,
audience.
Gift of the Shaper is the first book in my completed epic fantasy trilogy about a war between gods and mortals, where a young blacksmith comes into possession of an artifact that could either destroy the world or rebuild it. The only problem is he doesn't know it. So we've got two sides who are vying for this thing. You got gods on one side, gods on the other, and there is a clash in the middle that happens, and that basically spreads out through 3 books. So people say it's classic fantasy vibes. Like I always tell people, if they enjoy Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson, they're going to like my books.
That's sick. What was I mean, you kind of just answered it, but aside from like inspiration, like what kind of drove you to want to start that process?
Oh man. So like I said, I remember where I was when I wrote it, and I was in Kenya with a, little to no internet connection. And
Yeah,
there was like an
internet
old
out there
janky
blows.
Xbox, and there was Candy Crush. And there was me with I had a copy on my iPad of Robert Jordan's The Eye of the World, which is the first book in the Wheel of Time series. And I was reading that. And there was just something I felt. There was an urge to do something more besides reading. And the only way I could express it was to write my own story. And I wish I could remember who said this quote, because I love it and I use it, but I can never find the original version of it. It goes, sometimes you hear a story that you love so much that you want to tell one back. And that was what happened with me. And I was like, this makes sense. I grew up reading C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, and J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I was like, I think I can write fantasy. And literally just that day, sat down with my iPad and started writing what eventually became Gift of the Shaper. I did all 120,000 words on my iPad, just typing away like an absolute lunatic. And it took me about maybe 2 years in total, I think, to finish that book. But I did while I was on active duty, and published in February of 2018. And I left to try and be a full-time author in November, and now I'm realizing my dream. It's a little later than I would have thought, but it's a lot of hard work. It is very hard work. So there's and to sort of to answer your question more specifically, there's 3 paths to publishing. There's self-publishing, hybrid, and traditional publishing. And I did the second one. I was hybrid publishing. So my specific path was, I put out query letters to agents and everything to try and be traditionally published. But eventually I ended up hooking up with a small press publisher based out of Pensacola called Indigo River Publishing. And pretty much they are the bridge between traditional and and self-publishing. Traditional, the publisher handles everything. Self-publishing, you pay for and handle everything yourself. Hybrid is right in the middle. So I basically had to, in order to produce the book, we agreed on a fee that I would pay them, and they did everything for me. They did the editing, they did the interior design, they did, get it listed on Amazon, get it distributed and everything like that. And I do, the marketing, I do the, basically that's it. I just do the marketing. So it's kind of nice. Whereas like now so I'm considered an indie author because I was not traditionally published. And I'm friends with a bunch of people who are self-published. And I know like how difficult it is
Mm-hmm.
for them to just handle everything, the workload that they put up with, contacting your own cover artist, getting your art, commissioned for you and everything like that. So there's definitely a balance. And, someday I think I would like to be completely trad, like they call them the big five. It used to be big five and now it's big four. Like Simon and Schuster, Penguin, all the names that you'll
I'm most
recognize
familiar with
when
Penguin.
people
Yeah.
say them. So,
Yeah.
it's so just interesting to me because there's pros and cons to all of it. And there is no right way to get your book out there, which is something that I've always said, because uh, I know a bunch of indie authors who are more successful than some trad authors that I am friends with. So just because you get your book trad published does not immediately mean it's going to be a success. And I think that's the thing that not a lot of authors really realize when they're signing these deals and they're like, this is the only way to make my book a success is to sign with Simon and Schuster, and I'm going to hold out until I sign with them. So it's definitely interesting, and there's many paths that you can take.
What made you want to go hybrid over traditional?
For me, it was the best option, honestly. I'd been querying for maybe 6 months, which is not long. Some people query for a year. Some people it takes them even longer. Some people it's a lot quicker. Basically, for me, I was looking at all. I was facing a bunch of rejection. So much rejection when you're querying and trying to get trad published, that finally when this publisher reached out to me and said, hey, we really like your story, we think you have a good story as like a military veteran who's written a fantasy novel, we would like to publish it. For me, I was like, well, this sounds awesome. So, I sat down with my family and a bunch of people I trust, and I was like, what do you guys think about this? And they said, here's the good, here's the bad. And in the end, the good outweighed the bad. And, it's very interesting to me because when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I had a much smaller audience, basically just family and friends, right, on Facebook. And since then, I just had November 2025 and December 2025 were the 2 best months I've had in my author career since my book launched. November was the best one, and then December was the best one. So it's crazy how like a book will find traction years later. And it's totally wild to me because I see my online presence growing and I see my audience growing, and I'm like, what is happening? What am I doing? Like, I still, I'm just like, I make the content, I put it out there, and it seems to resonate with people. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I really hope this reel takes off.
Hey, friends. If you're finding value in these conversations, it would mean a great deal to me if you would share the episodes with your friends. Word of mouth is how this show grows. It's how we reach more people with stories like these, and it's how we build this community of people preparing for their finest hour. Every share and every additional listener allows me to put more resources back into making this show even better for you. If you would do that for me, I promise to work intently to ensure this becomes a show you genuinely look forward to, rather than just another podcast in your feed. If you need something to share, you can head to yfhpodcast.com. Again, that's yfhpodcast.com. There it should have everything you need. Thank you, and let's get back to the show. Personally, I care about people's stories, like their background, how they got to where they are, which I think is awesome. And your book does a really good job of like stringing that journey through, if that makes sense. You brought up the good versus the bad So I wrote down four things, I guess, and I'll just list them out right now. So in the event that we go off tangent and I come back to them, like at least they're listed. One, I really want to talk about your process
Mm.
of writing. There's a few authors that I personally follow just through like podcasts or like some of their content. I'm a huge fiction fan. I'm more of like the sci-fi flavor. I huge diehard like Star Wars fan. And so I'm very curious on your process of writing. When you reached out to the publisher, it was like you had to weigh the good versus bad. I'm super curious on what those
Mm.
pillars were, I guess I could call it. Like what was the good, what was the bad, what did the good outweigh the bad for
Yeah.
you? And then the other thing I was going to talk about or ask you about was the mental health, I guess you could call it, is the
Mm.
overarching topic. And so I am super curious with the good versus the bad in your specific situation when you sat down with your family. No one else had prior experience with publishing a book, right? So you're kind of like the first one stepping into that zone.
My dad had written a business book, so it was,
Got it.
yeah,
Okay.
so he knew like what to look for in the contract itself, but path for publishing nonfiction is different than publishing fiction, which is my forte. So, he kind of, it's like learning Spanish when you already know Portuguese. It's like there is some overlap, but it's not going to be one to one.
That's a good linguist. Yeah, yeah,
That's all I
yeah.
got, man. That's
I got
all I
that.
got.
Yeah. Yeah. The linguists that listen to this are going to be like,
Got
got
it.
it.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. So the good, well, I'll start with the bad for me. And it was having to pay to get my book published. Because a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, why would you ever pay to have your book published when, you can, when there's self-publishing out there, which like to me, like I know roughly how much it costs to produce a book. I'm friends with self-published authors and they've told me the figures and it is very comparable to what I ended up paying to have my book produced, which in the end was like extremely valuable to me. Because back then it was a lot of money for an enlisted guy, right? I was an E5 at the time, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of a lot of money. This is thousands of dollars that I'm paying to have this book produced." If I knew then what I know now, I would have signed with them on the first day. I had a team at my disposal, right? I could bounce ideas off people. When you're self-publishing, you are a team of one. And you and I both have been in one deep positions, and it's not fun when something comes up that you can't handle, right? Like I love being able to ask people for advice. I love being able to turn to someone and say, I can't handle this right now. Is there any advice or help that you can give me? So to me, hybrid publishing ended up being the right answer because I was able to be like, hey guys, I don't know what I'm doing here. Do you have any advice for me? Um, do you have any expertise that you can lend me? So, really the only downside was, the cost, the upfront cost, which ended up being like negligible. I've made that back, over the years, and it was an investment that was worth it to me.
Yeah. Do you remember what the cost was? Just for my own
It
curiosity, I
was,
guess.
somewhere around $5,000 at the time.
Which, to your point, looking back on it, because as I was writing some of your notes, or excuse me, some notes from some of the stuff that you were saying, you paid the cost, the upfront cost, and to your point, as a E5, $5,000. So like, I don't know about all that, bro. Oh, yeah, for this thing that is not a validated concept, right? Like you
Mhm.
know nothing about this specific
Yeah.
organization, and so while there's the cost, there's the I forget the word that you use, but like you just don't know. And so you felt like you paid for expertise, prolonged
Mm.
judgment, really, because I feel as if the way you described it, if you were to bring up an idea to the publisher, it's not really helping them and you at the same time. More than likely, they're going to
Yeah.
say no, which allows you to stay aligned throughout the entire
Yeah.
process, is what I'm gathering from
And
what you
and
said.
I was also their first fantasy title too. Like this was still they were a small publisher. They still are considered small press, but they're growing, which is very cool. And I there was growing pains, and both of us have learned a lot since I signed with them in 2016. But like they've listened to me on some of the input that I've had, and they've been really great about it. Like after my book sold well enough, it was only available at first in paperback. And then they were like, hey, we kind of want to put this out in hardcover. And I was like, I didn't even know that was an option. That's a really good idea. Yeah, let's do that. So, there's definitely things that they've been working for me, to do and to help promote. And it is nice to have like a team. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm happy about in the long run.
I was told that hardcover, just to give some background for the audience of like how much this stuff costs and how much from the total cost actually goes into your
Yeah.
pocket. Because just for example, I was told that the cost in total from paperback to hardcover is like a huge
And it,
jump. As far as like, let's say you sell it for $5, like that's a complete $2 out of $5 difference from like you getting $4 out of the entire
yeah.
$5.
And that's one of the biggest differences. That is probably the biggest difference between indie publishers and traditional publishers is the royalty split.
That's what it's
Indie is
called.
a
Thank you.
lot
Yeah.
more generous. Indie is famously more generous than traditional publication because traditional publishers are so huge that every cent is accounted for, right? They have giant marketing teams. They have in-house editors. They've got everything that you can think of. They've got 3 people on staff for what an indie publisher is going to have maybe one person doing. So the costs are, a lot more reasonable and manageable for indie publishers, smaller press, which is why they can afford to pay their authors better. And but it is also like when you have the power of a Simon and Schuster behind you, you're going to sell 10 times, 100 times what you might if you were just an indie author. Like, for example, I'm not in any airport displays. I've heard the number. I've heard how much it costs just to have your book placed there, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 just to have your books displayed in the airport, which doesn't even guarantee that they're going to sell, right? Like, every time you go by, you see the same books that are the most popular in the entire world because they've got the money to throw at them, right? They know they're going to sell. You go into an airport right now, you're going to see a copy of Fourth Wing. You might see Brandon Sanderson's Wind and Truth, which would be wild because it's a fantasy novel, but you're going to see Sarah J. Maas and A Court of Thorns and Roses. I can guarantee you right now, you go to 10 airports, you're going to see him in 9, maybe all 10. Because the publishers have that money, right? They're like 30 grand all day, and they'll unload 100 copies of them, but it's like, I'll maybe move 100 copies in a month, like on a good month, right? And the difference in scale is staggering. But at the end of the day, I'm one person, whereas the author, the publisher has to feed 10,000 people, right? So with my publisher, they're having to feed 30 or something like that. So there's definitely like at the end of the day, the money is also a big factor in it.
That makes sense. I'm huge into like target audiences.
Right.
So when we were in the weapon school, I created a little document that helped other students like create like briefs, like effective briefs is what I call them. Because there's a difference between like you being a linguist, they expected you to know your environment, know your language, obviously, like know just a lot of history and like background to include threats. They're like, yeah, all the history and background shit is cool, but like how does that keep us from getting shot down?
Yeah.
And so I used to always explain that there's a difference between like giving a brief and teaching a concept to an audience. And you have to have a deep understanding of like who your audience is, what they actually care about. Because even in that sentence, when you were to show up, let's say when you flew for Task Force Torch, there's a difference between what I would explain to the pilot and what I would explain to you, not even because there's a knowledge gap, but there's just simply shit that the pilot cares about that is not what you care about, right? And so with that being said, I've always really cared about target audience. All that to say, airport buyers. And you even kind of answered it with saying that fantasy is unlikely to be in the airport for most airports. Like, who is an airport buyer, or like what kind of book are they looking for? Is that like in your wheelhouse?
That's a good question. And I think honestly, like bookstores, especially airport bookstores, kind of have their niches figured out. They definitely do. They've got all the figures and all the data and all the numbers, and they can usually pick out pretty well. Like we're gonna have 10 copies of Susanna Collins' new Hunger Games book, right? We're gonna have 40 copies
That's a
of
great. I've seen Hunger Games in every airport I've ever been
exactly
in.
for good reason because they know it's going to sell. People hear the name because they're pouring advertising dollars into it, and people are like, "Oh, I've heard of this book. I had a friend talk about it. I'm going to buy this book." Whereas like Gift of the Shaper, it's like, "All right, what's that? Who's this publisher?" You know, a lot of times it's probably not even worth it if we're going to have to pay an upfront fee like that to have an indie book placed in an airport because people are going to be like, never heard of it, next. Like there's so much that goes into a person picking up a book and buying it. There's so much that goes into it. And I would say over 50% of it is just exposure to that particular book and hearing about it in conversations with people. Like we love things that are popular. Like it's just hardwired in our brains. Like people flock to something, we want to be a part of that. And it's just like, the advertising that goes into it. And, I mean, I will say Book Talk and like Bookstagram has been great for indie authors like me because it gives us this platform and it gives other people the ability to talk about books that I think not a lot of other people are talking about. And which is why today you're seeing a lot more indie authors going traditional because their books are selling tens of thousands of copies. And all of a sudden big publishers are being like, well, now I'm paying attention, right? And they see these books as a known quantity. And at the end of the day, publishers are not picking up books that are good, are picking up books that will sell, right? And there is a
Yeah.
distinction between those two things. An author that I follow on Instagram, her name is their name is Shirun J. Zhao. And they said, they had this really great quote, and it was like, and that was the quote. It was, publishers aren't looking for books that are good. They're looking for books that sell, because they had a book called Iron Widow, and it was a alternate history Chinese retelling of, this one emperor's rise to power. And Shirun J. Zhao told it with mechs, right? Like Voltron, or Evangelion. I can't remember but it was like, and every major American publisher said no. Every American publisher turned it down. And it was eventually picked up by a Canadian publisher where it became a bestseller, like international smash hit. And every single publisher looked at it and said, this will not sell. It's too weird, right? Which is why you get a lot of very interesting books in interesting indie books, because they break the mold and because we're telling stories that other people are not telling. I think the best example is, for me personally, this book that is in publication right now, or in production right now, Dreams of Blood and Shadow. It is an Aztec-inspired fantasy. And how many Aztec-inspired fantasies can you name off the top of your head, besides the one I just named?
Dude, never.
Yeah. The answer is probably going to be zero for a vast majority of people. I have since found 2 books that are both Aztec-inspired fantasy since I wrote it and turned it into my publisher. Right. But I started writing this book after I finished Gift of the Shaper. I started first writing this book 2017, 2018, somewhere around then. I put it on the back burner, finished my High Glade series, and then finished it in last April. So it's been a long time coming, but that gave me those many years to figure out another Aztec-inspired fantasy. And I came across 0. in my entire time because it's just not something that sells at the end of the day, right? And I queried it. I thought it was a good story, but more and more I realized it was a tougher sell because there's not an existing marketplace for it, right? You can make a leap between fantasy and Aztec inspired fantasy, but unless you've got what's called comps or comparative titles, unless you're like, oh yeah, the Poppy War and, Shadow of the Gods or whatever,
Hmm.
which are two of the books that I used as my comps when I was querying. But those two books, neither of them are Aztec inspired. They just deal with gods and mythology. And I was like, I don't know, there's not really any other books out there that are like this. And publishers hate to hear that. Agents hate to hear that because, a book like Fourth Wing, where, it's like one of the most wildly popular books of 22, I think, 2022. It's got dragons, right? People love dragons and they'll name like a comp title for it. And, it's like, okay, some people will buy it based on the fact that there are dragons in it. They don't need to hear anything else about the book. They're like, dragons sold, cool, and it's definitely I got a lot of stuff to say about it. It's definitely a wild place to be and to sort of exist in the space of news stories, because it was I want to say Fourth Wing didn't start out as a major on a major publication. It basically just blew up, and now it's one of the most popular books in the world. So but it's funny because I did a reel the other day on so I put up a picture of Sword of Kaigen, The Martian, Dungeon Crawler Carl. You know what all these books have in common? They all started out self-published. All four of those books started out self-published and became trad. They went trad. A publisher picked them up after they'd all sold, 50,000 copies or whatever.
You feel like that was a product of the marketing?
I don't. It's word of mouth. It's absolutely word of mouth. And again, it speaks to the quality of the book, which is something that publishers don't look for. Because like, if you were to like, have you read Dungeon Crawler Carl? It's weird, man. It's real weird. And it is not at all something that it wasn't picked up by traditional publishers because it's just so bizarre and there's nothing like it. It's technically like a lit RPG, right? It's like is what the genre is called, and it's about this guy, aliens invade the planet and turn it into a dungeon, and this guy has to fight his way out of it, right? And it's like, I'm sorry, what? It's just so there's no other book out there that's like it. And obviously there's copycats now, and there's people who are like, Dungeon Crawler Carl, that was a fun thing, I'm going to write about that. There's nothing else like it when it was published. And again, self-published, I think he had like 4 or 5 books in the series out. He was releasing like one a year, and people are just talking about it. And it was 100% word of mouth. I think it's like the best-selling book right now. Very well may be. Got picked up for a TV series, all this stuff. Like, it's crazy popular. And this Matt Dinniman is the guy who wrote it. He's like, I was not ready for this. He was not at all prepared for the level of success that he's experiencing. And he's like, this is crazy. So he was not expecting it. I think he is now signed, maybe a year or two ago, signed with a traditional publisher, and now it's like trad distributed and everything like that. And because it's sold like millions of copies, it's crazy. So, it just, at that point, it makes sense for the publisher to go, thanks, we'll pay you a bunch of money and we'll take it from here, because he's already laid the groundwork and he's already proven that he can do something. So it's really very interesting because they don't like to take a lot of big risks. They like to do sure things. And you see the same thing in Hollywood, right? Which is always why people give indie films so much credit, because those are the ones that are, experimental. They're talking about things that, the Avengers aren't going to talk about, so
Yep.
It's like there's a pattern of what sells. And it doesn't necessarily overlap with what is good and what has literary or artistic merit.
Oh man, I really want to ask. I want to ask 2 questions. I'll ask them right now, just so we can remember. Where do you fit in between trying new things and what works and is like very evident that it works. The second question is feedback. So you were talking about queries earlier. I am exceptionally curious on going back to the mental health like note that I wrote, where feedback comes from throughout this entire process. And then two, how much of that feedback, either from other people, from family members, from, content and stuff like that, how does that inform what you continue to write? Does that make sense?
And both questions are good, and I'll do my best to answer both of them because I want to. And the feedback thing is actually really hugely important to me. And so, circling back to what I was talking about earlier with my Aztec inspired fantasy, I hired what's called a sensitivity reader, or multiple sensitivity readers, because I'm writing about a culture that is not my own. I'm writing about a people that's not my own. And it's a difficult thing for a writer to do, but I think it's also very essential, right? Like, we're only going to write about our own experiences. The world is kind of boring. And like, I think that stories are stories, no matter where they come from, no matter who they're inspired by. So I wanted to make sure that I got it right. And I hired someone who, I have a bunch of Latina friends, women who beta read for me, and a bunch of people who are Aztec or Mexica descendants who, are part of that culture, who speak the language Nahuatl. And I had them read this book and be like, is there anything that is culturally insensitive in here? Is there anything that I should change or that sounds weird to you? And I also did that I have a deaf character in the book too. And I had a member of the deaf community read it and give me some very useful and helpful feedback that me as a hearing person that I would not have thought of, right? The one example that I'll use is I had a deaf character who uses signs, and every time I would have someone translate the signs into spoken language, I used the word translate, which, obviously you and I, coming from the community that we came from, I used the word translate. I worked with that. And this author said to me, interpret is actually the word that you are looking for. It's always interpret.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And if a member of the deaf community was reading my book and they saw the word translate instead of interpret, it's going to set off a red flag, and they're like, nobody who knew what they were talking about read this. So
100%.
for me, that is why feedback is an essential part of the process. And again, and that should tell you that branches perfectly into the second answer of my question of doing the thing that's different and doing the thing that's like unpopular. Again, how many Aztec inspired fantasy books written by a white person, a white male, do you know of? And the answer is 0. The answer is 1 now, but the answer was 0 before this. Both Aztec inspired fantasy novels that I picked up were written by women of color, actually, both women in both cases. So, I like to tell myself that that's why I was met with so much rejection. I'll never know the answer, but I am aware of the fact that probably contributed to it, because they see my name, they see D.L Jennings, they see a white person who's writing about another culture that is not his own, and they're like, this could be, in some cases, problematic, right? Like, I'm on Threads, I'm on social media, I am aware of my demographic and where I'm coming from, and I have to be very careful and remind people I'm doing this not to diminish the voices of these people, but to uplift them, not to replace them, but to make them louder, to strengthen them, to make sure that other people are hearing them. And I learned this term in so late in my life. I learned this term, but I had a friend point it out to me, and it's cultural appreciation, which is the opposite of cultural appropriation, which I was unfamiliar with. I was like, that's a great term. Oh my God, I need to start using that. And I need to, incorporate that not only into my vocabulary, but into my thinking. It's like, it's so important, because there are authors who have appropriated culture for their own financial gain, and it ends up being a really terrible thing. And people who are exploited, people who are marginalized, speak up about it, and they say, "What are you doing to help us? How does that help us? You're taking from us. You're not giving." So it's something that I have to be very aware of, and I'm all for it too. Like I love the Aztec culture. I love the mythology from that whole region of the world, and I wrote it out of falling in love with it. I was like, this is such a cool thing. Why are there no books about this? That's one of the things that they tell you is, as a writer, if you can't find the book that you want, you need to write it for yourself. So that's what I sat down and did.
That's interesting. For a ton of reasons. The one that I'm immediately thinking of is I would have to imagine, I'm sure this is very hard to communicate, but with the cultural appreciation, I would have to imagine that it's hard for you to explain being a Korean linguist, like formally, I guess, that you inherently have to like immerse yourself in several cultures just to learn the language, and I've always said that the military is like, sure, we talk about being a hodgepodge community, like there's people from everywhere. I've always appreciated, not to continue to use that word, like how many cultures there are, because if I were to show up, I mean, I say this in jest because it's a little bit different, like me being a black dude. If I were to show up to a different cultural like party or something like that, and I'm dressed in whatever the local attire is, people would be like, yo, that's dope.
Yes.
But also, I feel like there's an element of like charisma that you also share, that if you were to do the same thing, I would like to think that people wouldn't look sideways of like, what the hell is this guy doing? But again, that's within the military.
That's a fantastic point. And I think that is a really big part of it too, is, focusing again, yes, we're overusing the word, but the appreciation aspect of it is so incredibly important. And it's like, I mean, if you're wearing like a kimono or something like that, if you're doing it respectfully and like out of genuine love for the culture, people are going to be like, hell yeah, man. Like, that's awesome. You look cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling people more about like, our traditional dress and stuff like that, and, one of my friends, happens to be a black woman, was, showing me around in Austin, when I did a book signing there. And she pointed that out because I had talked a little bit about Dreams of Blood and Shadow and about writing about a different culture. And afterwards, she was like, I really think you need to focus more on the fact that you have experienced other cultures. She was like, the average American doesn't really travel, doesn't really get out of the country. And she was like, you've been to all these countries, you've learned languages, like I speak Spanish, I speak Korean, I speak a smattering of other languages because like that's the kind of person I am. I love these things. I love finding things out about new cultures. And she's like, you really need to focus on that, because I think when a lot of people just see you as white guy writing about Aztec culture, they're going to be like, clearly he doesn't appreciate, he's using this for his own benefit. And it's why I'm so vocal about it. I'm like, I love this stuff. I think these stories need to be told, so it's difficult, weirdly enough, right? Like, I'm not a marginalized person. As a white person, I recognize I was born with a certain amount of privilege, and I try and keep that in the front of my mind all the time. But because I am trying to write outside of my little circle of like white European mythical, fantasy or whatever, I have to do it the right way. I have to make sure there's a wrong way to do it and there's a right way to do it. And I have to make sure that I'm doing it the right way. So yeah, I love your point about, appreciating other cultures like that. And I think that's something that needs to be echoed.
The comment that your friend made, I tend to agree that I think you should lean into that. To both of your points, like, I don't think it's intentional, but I think most people kind of like don't want to be a part of other people's cultures, not only because of the security of their own. People just generally don't like getting out of their comfort zone, but also because it's become so over politicized.
It's tough to step outside of your comfort zone. It really is. People love things that make them comfortable. Everyone does. It's hardwired into us. We're supposed to. But, it is at the same time, like, occasionally you wanna do something that will challenge you, that will make you grow.
Yeah.
Like, it's resistance training is the example that I always use. It's like, you're never gonna get stronger without challenging yourself, right? You have to break things down in order to build yourself up.
Mhm.
So, by, like, our nature as humans, we need to challenge ourselves if we're gonna get better, if we're gonna get stronger. So, as nice as it is to like wrap ourselves up in that nice little blanket of everything that we're familiar with, you have to step out of it every now and again. And you and I both like having traveled so much in the military and be exposed to all these different cultures that like I never would have set foot in the Middle East ever. Like, if I had not deployed there, and now I know so much about it.
That was just a funny, like, how you delivered that was very funny. I would have never set foot in the Middle East.
And it's like,
Because why would you? Like, yeah,
yeah, I
God.
I mean, I've just, it's so wild to me because I think there's so many people who just don't travel. Like, I know so many people, number 1,
Mhm.
who don't have passports, and number 2, who have never left their own state. There's people alive in the year of our Lord 2026 who've never left their own state. And it blows my mind as somebody who's lived in 15 of them, right? Like I've had it, and that's probably lowballing it. That is probably lowballing the number of states that I have gotten mail and utilities in, right? Like, I'm not talking 6 months. I'm talking years at a time, have an address. The FBI could track me down if they had to?
On your
Absolutely. Oh
SF-86.
my God, the thing is just such a nightmare. Oh, I'm so glad I am never gonna do one of those in my entire life. I will never do one of those again. And, God help me. I hope that comes true, but like, and I'll tell you,
Yeah.
and like I was read out last month. I was read out for the last time of my, after I
Oh, no
left
way.
my contracting job. I could get a clearance again, but like as it stands right now,
Mhm.
I don't have an active TS clearance anymore. So which is
Yeah.
weird. And because it's been the first, for 21 years, that was my life. And now it's like, oh shit, I really have to make this work.
Where can people find you? You said you were all over social medias doing all the things. Where can people find you? And then I guess a good question to ask, an extension of the airport, like target
Hmm.
audience, if you could just do a quick rundown of like people who have listened this far in the episode, where would you want them to go? And what kind of person, I guess, do you want it that at those different like
That's a
touch points,
that's a
if that
great
makes sense?
question. The quick answer that I like to give is Google D.L Jennings. And that will take you pretty much usually the first link that comes up is probably going to be Instagram, or it may be my website, which is dl-jennings.com. And from those two places, you can basically find everything. My Instagram is by far my largest social media presence. It's got my link tree on it, which has all the links to everything. I'm on YouTube, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. Let's see, I'm on Threads, like pretty much like you name a social media and I'm there. And that's by design. I get people asking me like, where can I get your books? And because people default to Amazon for obvious reasons. Again, rich bald billionaire, right? Who's got money to throw at
Yep.
these things. So my answer is always number one, buy direct from the author. And for me, that means going to my website and, buying, like, I get signed copies. So I'll sign it out and I put it in the mail myself. Number two is to call your local indie store, not a Barnes and Noble, but an indie store, mom and pop, like owned, and ask them to carry my book and ask them, say, hey, I would like to pick up Gift of the Shaper by D.L Jennings. And if you don't have a mom and pop store, Barnes and Noble's fine. And then always at the end is whatever gets the book in your hand. I don't like putting money in Jeff Bezos's pocket, but if it means you reading my book, then I'll take it. It's the lesser of two evils. And then I guess the people who I'd want to It's always funny, like, trying to define my demographic, but,
Mm.
my chief demographic is people who enjoy fantasy, people who enjoy a good story. Some of my favorite reviews on Goodreads or on Amazon have started with, "I don't normally read fantasy, but." So, if you enjoy stories with multiple casts of characters, multiple POVs, I have strong female protagonists, and those kind of things. Like if you enjoy a story, you know, it's epic fantasy. It's good versus evil. It's high stakes. Those are the people that are going to benefit from reading my book and who are going to get something out of it. So, you know, I always say like there's a small overlap between people who've served and people who read fantasy, but those are my favorite people. You know, it's like those people get me. They know what I've been through. They know what I'm writing about. They know why I'm writing. So it is a small circle. It's a small overlap in the Venn diagram, but it's a very crucial one.
You got anything else for the audience?
Can't think of anything that I haven't already said that's not like fun and snarky. So,
Yeah. Don't drink, don't drive, don't.
well, yeah, exactly. Be safe. Call your first sergeant.
Sweet, dude. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And then I don't know, whatever podcasts traditionally say, tune in
Like
next
and
time.
subscribe.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Dude, I'm so bad when it comes to that kind of stuff. Genuinely though, thank you for listening to the episode. If you view the episode on YouTube, a special thanks to that. If you view the episode on Spotify and you're driving, don't do that. I'm going to come for you. Thanks. Tune in next time.